Hello, everybody. Welcome. As usual, I am walking in the gardens, and there is a truly astonishing diversity of living beings here, including this incredible, gigantic Sequoia dendron giganteum, Sierra redwood. But this one looks more like an upside down octopus than a straight up and down redwood like we're used to seeing. It's an incredible organism. It's really beautiful. It can be difficult here because the humans do things that don't make sense at all the time. Right now they're chopping down old trees, many very old trees, to make room for what they're calling a greenhouse, but they already had a greenhouse. And really they should not be stealing land in the gardens for this project. And there's not much I can do about it. The humans often do very ridiculous things here in the garden. Of course, we live in a city, and so the imperatives of the city and of money have precedence over the importance of the living beings and relationships in the gardens. And this is a similar problem that we have in our own lives. The structured nonsense going on under the guise of civilization intrudes and invades upon and torments many aspects of our interiority and our humanity and our nature as organisms and beings. And it's tragic. It's heartbreaking. Many of my closest friends struggle with terrible burdens that have nothing to do with who they are or are not, but rather are the result of whether or not they fit into the bizarre artificial jigsaw of modern culture and society and the imperatives that underlie it. And the vast majority of those imperatives are fundamentally toxic. Of course, we can learn how this all came to be, and we can learn together how to form minds and lives that establish in our time, a new way of being human and intelligent, creative, playful, and loving together. And that's part of my hope and my dream. I was thinking, I'm often thinking, it's a problem for me. I was thinking last night about the video I made previously in which I spoke of the holophore of a people. Who are a people? And in our own lives, the question is important in various ways. One of them being, who are my people? Who are those people whom I feel at home with, recognized by, seen by, valued by, loved by, respected by. And in general, everyone, all the living beings are my people. But more specifically, I am most at home with creative people, artists, writers, some intellectuals, though less than the others a little bit, because the intellectuals can be rather severe and confused when they depart from relation into language and concept, right? But I'm at home with intellectuals too. A little less so. The cultural creatives, the people who are deeply, authentically creative, these people, we tend to immediately recognize each other. And of course, these are just words and categories. Actual situations, are much more diverse and rich. But yes, writers and artists, actors, comedians, dancers, painters, musicians. These are the people who I usually feel most at home with. And of course, there are people who don't belong to any class who I also feel an immediate kinship with, right? Not because they have some specific quality or behavior, but just because there's an affinity there that is felt. I feel it. I was just talking with there's a few old scions of our neighborhood. One of whom is named Fred. He's 90, but he's a very young 90. And he's, a troublesome and brilliant man. And there's another man in my neighborhood. Both of these are older gay men, which is, pretty common in my neighborhood where I live. Since San Francisco is one of the, one of the historical origins of freedom for people who are gay or differently oriented, uniquely oriented. Of course, they would say I'm differently oriented. What is difference? And when do we insert that idea? Right? Different from what? But San Francisco is one of the birthplaces of gay culture, and so we have a few beautiful old people. Yeah. And I was just speaking with Richard and his parrot Sherman, who's a very gentle animal. I got to have him on my arm for a bit. We were in a cafe together, and I'd spoken with him a few times before. He's a heartful and intelligent man. He's got to be probably closing in on 80. There may be some wind noise for a bit. I apologize. There's not much I can do about it. In any case, I was thinking last night about my previous video and some things that I could add to it. In that video, I spoke about the holophor of what are a people, and how in my own life I came to understand that the organisms, all of the organisms of Earth, these are peoples. And once I understood this, a lot of things changed for me in how I saw and related with the living world. Because with peoples, you know, in how we relate with them over time and in unique situations, we can acquire a relationship. Excuse me. What I meant was, obviously we embody a relationship, but we can acquire a reputation. And so, if I am kind and gentle with the bees, and if I occasionally help one of them or rescue one, word gets out. So that all the bees that I encounter relate with me, in a sense, according to my reputation, but also not just that, according to how I am treating them in the moment. There's both, right? There's both. Who is this person with me right now? Who are they being right now? And we have the same thing in our human world. Who are they being right now, and who do I know them as? You know, how are they known? What are they known for? And what are they known for? This is the idea of reputation. I'd like to know more about the etymological origins of that word, repute. And clearly there's a phoneme there from other words like represent, repudiate, reprehensible. Most of these are words with rather grim associations or connotations. But yes, once I realized that the living beings were peoples, then I began to learn that we acquire a reputation that spreads beyond a given encounter with some plant or animal or living place or group of beings. There are a number of specific beings I have close relations with. The bees, ants, and wasps, the whales, dolphins, squids, and octopuses, the spiders and praying mantises, especially the jumping spiders, the corvids, the crows, ravens, magpies, blue jays, the hawks, the Canadian geese, the white cheeks, Opspini, and Blackfoot, sage plant, rosemary plant, the lavender plant, the sourgrass, clover flowers. All of these beings, the sparrows, the blackbirds, hummingbirds, bumblebees, jasmine, honeysuckle, salvias, cactuses, lizards and snakes of diverse kinds, the bats. And there are many more. I mean, all of the beings are my friends. I don't know all their names. And I don't much like the English names. English names are leaving something out that's very important, which is, what is the nature of our relationship over time, the humans and these beings? Many older languages contain in the names hints about the relationships, and also there are old stories about when animals or plants helped our people in times of crisis or fear or need and also when we helped them. So what I was thinking last night, as I was reflecting briefly on the video that I'd made, the recording anyway, was something having to do with an aspect of cognitive activism that probably wasn't initially introduced by Alfred Korzybski, but was uniquely elaborated by him. And it's an idea called non-allness, right? And in our cognition, in our habits with language and concepts, we have a lazy weakness, a vulnerability that's often captured by agents or associations, corporations, governments, and so on. The media. And the weakness is to think of all instances of a class in one way, and to suppose that that way completely captures what's important about them, right? So if we think about trees, for example, right? All trees are trees. Seems very straightforward. Completely untrue. Vastly untrue. True in language and concept, not true in relation. The tree under which I sheltered in the rain for a time while the rain passed, I'm looking at this tree right now with love, protected me. It's not the same as all other trees. And the trees who I adore and have deep relations with, I can think of a few of them now, not the same, right? They're not regular instances of the class. A tree who speaks in your mind, suddenly, unexpectedly, will transform everything you ever thought about anything. And trust me, this happens. Trees can speak, but not in language. They speak in emotion. They speak in interiority, the flows, the ebbs, the floods, the waters of our interiority. And so all trees are trees only in language, but they are beings in my heart. And if they are beings, then you can see the dimensionality of the relational possibilities explodes infinitely into infinitude. There is no limit. So non-allness is a really important principle to understand and keep close to our awareness when we are thinking in terms of categories, or when we are reading language, or when people are making declarations or assertions or arguments. Non-allness simply points at the necessary and significant incompleteness of language. And the reason I bring this up is that when I think of identity, many people are trained to think of identity as point-like, right? It's one thing. It's a tree. Yeah. But the trees, like ourselves, we are all beings instanced in a unique form. We are the universe instanced in a unique, local, embodied form. And so the idea of a tree is insufficient to capture the identity and nature of what this word points at. So we're trained to think in point-like ways. We'll think, oh, this kind of person is a bad person. This other kind of person is a good person. This other kind of person is someone I can ignore. But kinds of people are transient. Right? The classes do not capture what they point at. And in fact, they evict most of it. And so what I was thinking, just to return for a a moment. One of the opposites of a point that's more useful is a topology, right? If you're driving somewhere, a flat road map will help you, right? It will show you routes. But if you are hiking somewhere, what you need is a topological map, because you need to know elevations. You need to know the differences in the terrain, right? For the sake of the car, the flat map is sufficient. For the sake of someone on foot, the flat map is insufficient. And in relationships, it's much more like being on foot. We have to see the peaks and valleys. And our language captures this almost not at all, very poorly in general, unless we're careful, in which case it's a little better. So what I was thinking last night was, it's true that the animals know, and the insects know, and perhaps the plants know, that the humans are very dangerous, often confused, sometimes cruel. And part of why they are dangerous and cruel and confused is because their ideas about living beings are mostly broken. Over time, they've suffered terrible amputations of relational dimensionality, opportunity, co-being. And this is the process that I refer to as the flattening of our concepts into tokens and tokenization. And this is natural for a species that lives in its head, is oriented toward turning relationships into commodities and transactions, and has lost the lion's share of their interiority to these processes over time. But the animals and insects don't only see us by class, right? And we are often inclined to see them by class. This rosemary plant that I adore, old rosemary plant, and the little spiders running on the ground next to it. They are my own heart, they are my own body. They are my friends, they are my family. And many people, this would sound bizarre to. The plants don't talk, they don't give you things, they don't, none of this is true. The plants do speak. In fact, their very forms are exquisitely beautiful. I'm tasting the sweetness of the nectar in the salvia flower right now. And in so doing, I join with this plant, with gratitude and reverence, with love. So, the animals and the living beings and the living places, they are aware of the generality of humans. Humans are dangerous, often confused. They can be cruel. And again, the reason is that they're sort of sleepwalking in the world, most of us, myself included. Many of the things I can speak about, I can only partially embody, even though I can see them. And my capacity to embody them depends on many things that they don't entirely lie beyond my control, but I too am influenced by context and habit. And like all beings, I hitchhike on the momentums that have precedence around me, right? But the living beings are also aware of non-allness, in the sense that although they may have some kind of implicit instinctual concern about humans, probably due to thousands of years of evolutionary experience with our life form. They are also aware, under some circumstances, that not all humans are that way all the time. Right? And this is an example of non-allness. Animals who have a history of long relation with our species. Bees are an animal like this. But so too are all of the synanthropes. Corvids, skunks, opossums, raccoons, squirrels, mice, rats, cats and dogs. Right? Cats and dogs are not, they've been, we use the word domesticated. It's kind of a strange word, but they've become our preferred symbionts, right? Cats and dogs may be terrified of humans if they've had bad experiences, but they may also be playfully fascinated and interested in relating with us and loving. They can directly demonstrate what is obviously love. Right? It's not a question. They're not simulating love. They love. They're being love. And so the animals and the plants and the living places reserve whatever way they may be concerned about our kind of animal in the world. They reserve a place within that concern for the exceptions. Right? The humans who care, who are gentle, who love, who have reverence and respect for other living beings. And some humans have to learn this, I guess, though this was not so much the case with me. I was pretty much born this way. But even in my loving early years, right, even as a child, when I was small, my human ideas could overwhelm my intelligence, and I would expect, for example, that I could take the fish with me and it would be my friend if I put it in my pocket. Which led to tragedy from the fish, for sure, and my heart, because I was crushed to discover I had harmed or killed the being that I loved by wanting to take it with me and have it with me all the time. Right? I thought they can be my pets. I was confused in this way between the inward and the outward. Right? It's safe to take them with me in my heart. It's not safe to take them with me in my pocket. And I honor with reverence the memory of those little fishes that I once put in my pocket, thinking I want them with me always. For I learned a difficult lesson with them and other beings. I had to make terrible mistakes in my life to understand the difference between how the humans are trained to think and act and what's actually possible and true and going on. Some of those lessons still sting. And even though I'm older now and have some experience that's broad and rich, I still make mistakes. I can still be frightened or confused. And some of those mistakes are very painful for me. When my confusion causes the death or suffering of other beings. Still happens. But my point was, that's funny. Actually, my topology was that in relating with living beings as instances of a people, right? This tree here is not just an instance of the tree people, it's an instance of all beings, it's an instance of vegetal beings, it's an instance of tree beings, it's an instance of its phenotype, right? The kind of tree that it is. And many other things that we don't even have language for. So no concept can capture it or convey it. But if we're going to choose one, it's better to choose one with more dimensionality than with less, because as we exclude the dimensionalities of being, we exclude the possibilities of our own minds and our own relational roles and capacities. So I was thinking last night that although the animals and living places and plants recognize humans as a serious threat, a very dangerous animal, I mean, nothing's really as dangerous as a human, except maybe lightning or volcanoes or something, bombs, I don't know, asteroids. But although they see us and recognize us as a threat, they are also aware that they have to pay attention to the uniqueness of the human in front of them in the moment and situation in which they are together. And thus you will often see, which apparently humans find this very surprising. I find it beautiful but not surprising. You'll see animals helping one another that would ordinarily not. They would ordinarily ignore each other or perhaps be aggressive toward each other. Or you will see animals helping humans, or you will see humans helping animals. And this is, it's beautiful, it's natural, because all beings are beings. So even though the humans are understood to be dangerous in general as a class, right? The living places and beings pay attention to the unique situation at hand with this human or these humans right here, right now. And this is why you see things like the grizzly man, right? The guy who hung out with the grizzly bears. Though he made, I think, a serious mistake that may have led to his death. And it's an interesting mistake, and I can't be sure what happened with him. I don't know for certain. But as was unlike his previous habit, he brought a female companion with him to an island where he knew there were specific bears that were quite aggressive. And in thinking about this, I just remember one day my girlfriend and I, we walked into a donut store and there was a young woman with a pretty large, fierce-looking pit bull. And as we walked in, the pit bull became very disturbed and somewhat aggressive. And its owner said, "Oh, wow, that's so strange. He never does this. He's never like this." And I took that seriously, so I thought about it for a moment. And when we walked outside, I asked my girlfriend Coco, a brilliant soul she was, I said to her, "Are you on your period?" And she said, "Yes, I started a couple days ago." And that made me think, these predators, the dogs and the bears, they sense blood. They can smell blood from a long way away. And I don't know that that's the explanation of the dog's discomfort. And nor do I know that that was the problem that got the grizzly man killed. Can't recall his name. But he should have thought twice about bringing his female companion to a place where there are grizzly bears, because it's not the same. He doesn't bleed, and she does. And again, I don't know, if this was the actual problem. It could have been something else. And you can see how once one has an idea, right, of an explanation for something, there's a propensity to just see that way and think, oh yes, this is the answer. But we have to have non-allness there too. We have to realize, that's an interesting idea. Reasonable, possible. Might not be the problem though. But I wonder about what happened with him, the grizzly man, and his female companion. I wonder if she had her period and it aggravated or, woke up something in the bears that might not have otherwise occurred. And again, this is the thing of paying attention to specifics, right? The fact that the bears are fine with him and won't hurt him, usually, is not true when the equation, so to speak, changes. You have to pay attention to the unique particulars. I wonder if he thought, he must have known that the grizzlies are very sensitive to blood. And as predators, hello, they have an affinity. They will seek out animals that are bleeding because those animals are often injured and are not just easier to kill. Sometimes, this may sound strange and it's a weird way of putting it, sometimes the injured animals need help dying, right? And the bear can kill them very quickly. And it's just important to be aware that animals like sharks, bears, dogs, some cats, their personality will transform dramatically if blood is in the water, if the scent of blood is in the air. And I'm pretty sure grizzlies can detect that sense at incredible distances. And they're what we usually refer to as apex predators. They're at the top of the food chain. Nothing hunts grizzly bears except humans. Nothing much hunts sharks. The occasional orca might get involved with that. Other sharks might get involved. But only humans pretty much hunt sharks. So I was thinking last night both about non-allness and about how when we relate with the living peoples, we acquire a reputation that spreads far and wide. I don't know the explicit extent of its spread, but it would not surprise me to find that it was kind of universal, that it might even be so universal as to escape temporal locality and follow us through many lives, presuming that something like reincarnation is going on. And I think there is something that resembles it going on, but it's probably much more complex than the way we think about it, because I don't I'm not a fan of the point-like idea of a soul. I'm a fan of the topology idea of a soul, where there are sort of a soul is a constellation of relationships outside of time, instanced locally in a given being. And all of these things fit together and sort of support each other in my mind, in my thoughts. All of the living beings have what I would call non-ordinary senses. Of course, they're entirely ordinary. The only place they're not ordinary is in our ways of thinking that exclude them. And many people will say, well, these are spiritual things. Okay, I'm not terribly opposed to the idea, but they're fundamentally relational things. They don't require fancy metaphysics, and we don't have to explain them. And many of them are probably inexplicable in the models and language and conceptual milieu that we're accustomed to as formal representational cognitives in the modern age. It's clear to me when I relate with bees physically with my hands that they are aware of my reputation. And they're also aware of the character of my interiority. In fact, if humans wanted to understand whether minds can touch each other or not, a really amazing potential here has been overlooked, which is that in terms of cell mass, we are enormous. Of course, whales are much bigger than us, and there are other animals that are larger and living places are enormous compared to us. But in terms of cell mass, a human has probably, 50 trillion cells, maybe 25 trillion of which are bacterial, come from the world, 25 trillion of which approximately are eukaryotes, come from our gene line and our mitochondrial line. So if size matters in this way, and I suggest that it does, and we wanted to find out whether we could touch other minds, right? The first place to look, or a really good place to look, would be how are very tiny creatures affected by our local presence? Can we touch the minds of insects? I would start there. Of course, if we really wanted to take it to its nth degree, we could, use microscopes and determine if we can touch the essential being of microorganisms, which I strongly suspect we can. I have good reason to suspect that from experiment. But with insects, a class of organisms that humans usually ignore or think of as trivial, which is ironic since their biomass vastly exceeds our own on the planet, which also means their sensing mass vastly exceeds ours. The insect populations are aware of subtleties in the character of environments and the sun, and the moon, the weather, the chemical makeup of atmospheres that humans will never approach no matter what instruments we build. And so that great sensitivity provides an opportunity. And I've witnessed things that seem to me miraculous. Here's Zepharos chasing his enemy. Yeah. Chasing him off. defending his territory. He shows his force, his power by pecking the branches on the tree that his enemy is settled in. Well, it's not exactly his enemy. That's too simple a language. But the one who is intruding, the Stellar's jay. You see, he's using distributed communication. He could yell at his enemy, or the interloper, but instead he taps a branch on a tree. And if you've not had this experience, it's really quite profound, because sometimes the jays, when I first arrive in a place where they know me, and I place my palm against a tree because I'm connecting with the tree, the jays will land on the tree and tap, 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 tap. And I'll feel the pulse of that tapping in the wood, and it's a visceral, very powerful feeling. You can feel the physical power of the animal. And it seems to me the males are more oriented toward this behavior, but both of them, the male and the female, both employ it. And it's not just to drive off enemies, it's also a way of communicating, right? Because the Stellar's jays, in this case, are not trying to drive me off, they're trying to welcome me. They're saying hello. But yes, if we wanted to understand something about do minds touch, one of the places we might start is with very small creatures, and seeing if our minds can influence the very small creatures, if they can sense us, if they can sense our intention, or if we can communicate with them with our minds. And I've experienced astonishing things in this regard. I remember one year, a queen paper wasp awoke too early. It was too cold, and I could tell she was struggling and would not survive. I felt. So I brought her in my home, and I had a cage I could put her in for a while, and I fed her. Mostly, I made sure she had water and sugar water. She probably needed other things, but then one day it became very clear that it was time to let her go. Right? It was warm enough now, she would survive. And I had to negotiate getting her out of the cage and into the sunlight. She needed the sunlight to warm her body so that she could fly. And Coco was with me on this day. And we opened the cage, and I spoke to her in language, but I was using my imagination. I pictured what I was saying. And I gave her a series of directions, Walk over to this edge of the cage, climb up on this stick, and I will take you into the sun. And don't fly off of the stick, because I need to get you into the sun. And she followed each of my directions explicitly. And Coco was shocked, even though, she was an unusually minded, beautiful human being. And I myself was surprised, because the insect followed essentially 5 consecutive directives instantaneously and without deviation. How did she know? But I have lots of relationships with insects where this kind of thing happens all the time, though usually not so explicitly. There are many small insects who are my friends, who I form relationships with. I remember when I was a young child, maybe 7 or 8, in our backyard in Stockton, which had been made out of farmland, what had been farmland for many years. So when we first got there, there were many spiders and praying mantises and insects, though DDT was going to change that right quick. In any case, there was a huge orb weaver. I mean, honestly, with her legs spread, she was probably almost as big as my face. Her abdomen was probably 3/4 the size of an egg. She was huge. She could eat small birds. I never saw her do that. She lived in our backyard for a while, and although this is I feel a little bit sad for the moths now, but I used to catch these grass moths in my hands, and I would hold them up to her web, and she would climb down on my hand and very gently, very gingerly take them off and bite it and carry it back into her web and wrap it up and eat it. And she came to know me this way, and I came to know her. And my parents were quite nervous, but I wasn't concerned because I knew she was my friend. And I had not dissimilar relationships with black widow spiders when I was a child. A spider that everyone thinks of as deadly. I used to have a false bunk so that there was more room in my bedroom, and my father built for me. So my bed was up near the ceiling, and one year, black widow, which I was, obviously I was friendly with these spiders in general, and this is the thing about having a reputation, right? Among a living people. One year, a black widow made its nest right above where I slept in the corner of the ceiling. And my parents were extremely upset about this. Like, we're not letting that happen. You gotta take that out. And I said, don't you dare touch that spider. Of course, she and I, she was my companion. She was my friend. Every night I would look up and see her, and I wasn't afraid, and she knew I respected her, and there was no problem there. But eventually she made an egg case, and that was a problem. I don't recall how we solved it. I like to think we solved it in a beautiful way, but it seems unlikely that we could have. I don't think we killed the egg case. I probably put it in a jar and let them hatch and let them go, but we couldn't have hundreds of baby black widows right where my bed is, because they're gonna, they'll distribute themselves. But yes, I've had many adventures with small creatures, and if we wanted to understand whether our minds or our souls or something within us can directly touch the being of other creatures, which I am absolutely certain that it does and it can. But if we wanted to experiment, there's Epharos making his greeting display. He zooms by my face. One moment. If we wanted to understand this, then we could experiment with very small creatures, because the consciousness mass of our cell mass is like a galaxy. I don't know how many cells comprise an ant or a bee or a wasp or a spider, but it's probably something like 1/10,000,000th or 1/1,000,000,000th of the cell mass of our bodies. And so we must appear to them relationally as like a galaxy compared to, I don't know, a star. And so if we want to understand whether we can directly communicate with other beings, very small beings are a good place to start. But yes, the humans represent a danger, but not only a danger, also an opportunity for communion, reunion, co-being, friendship, companionship. And we have to be sensitive, as I was not as a child, right, to the differences in our way of being in the world as compared with an ant or a bee or a spider or a wasp or a bird or a mouse or a tree or a living place. And we have to be careful of taking them into our world, because our world is not friendly to children and hearts and spirits and living beings. Our world tends to make of them commodities, representations. You go to the toy store and you'll see we don't just represent the animals as toys. We represent the humans as toys too. All of the beings. We represent them. Yeah. So our world is dangerous for them. I can't put the fish in my pocket and take them with me. And when we treat the other beings with kindness and reverence and respect and adoration, word gets around. Yeah. In the living library of beings on earth, we come to be known. We have the capacity to come to be known as a good companion, a good friend. As someone beloved. I talk with the bees in my heart and my imagination, and sometimes with my words. And they return the favor, but not in ordinary language. While we're awake, the structure of our minds is not conducive, generally, to exploring the living library, the cognitium of the beings on earth, which the human cognitium is a sub-array of. So over time, we acquire a reputation. And for some of us, that's no reputation. We're just like any other human most of the time. But when we engage heartfully, attentively, with wonder and mutual concern, reverence, respect, then we come to be recognized by all the living beings in the living places. Everyone knows that an encounter with a bear or another apex predator, wolf pack, it's a danger. It's dangerous. We could get hurt, we could be killed. These are predators. But that's only provisionally true. In the right state of mind, those beings become extensions of our own bodies and hearts and will not harm us, because they will recognize in us communion. The possibility of friendship, companionship. Ifaros. He's paying very close attention to something. He is aware of something I cannot see. But by attending him, my mind changes. Though I do not yet see what is concerning him, I can see that there's something important going on right now for him. Could be that there is a hawk nearby, but I don't get that impression. It's something else that he's concerned about. And he's quite concerned. Of course, I am a bit distracted because I am speaking. And when I am speaking, I'm less sensitive. I will return in a moment. So, it's important to be sensitive in the moment to what's going on right here, right now. It's not that we want to necessarily exclude previously obtained knowledge, models, categories, ideas, but rather that we need to know when it's time to set those down and sense right now with our bodies and our hearts and our minds what's going on right here, right now. And when I noticed that my companion, my friend, Ifaros, was concerned about something, it's not possible for me to just go on talking, right? If I want to understand, I'm going to need to shift my awareness. and open the gates of my senses. Sometimes this requires branching away from language, concepts, ideas, letting those settle into the background. So that other forms of awareness, older forms, and other sensitivities can surface in consciousness. Now, I wasn't able to discover yet what Ifaros is concerned about today, but it's very clear that something's different. Something's up in his world that isn't immediately apparent to me. And at the moment, he's not with me. So I can't sense with him. Although it is possible to sense at a distance with those with whom we are in deep relation. And I am very concerned. When something is troubling my friend. I can't always help, and sometimes my desire to help can backfire and turn into a path toward harm. And this is deeply troubling to me. And if my senses were really good, then I like to think, oh, I could sense that and avert danger. But when I relate with living beings, there is a danger. I'm a huge, confused animal. I'm used to my everyday experience of relating with Ifaros and other beings in the contexts that I'm used to. Right? And so it's easy for me to become distracted in such a way that I inadvertently cause harm, or I am not active in averting harm. Now, of course, these ideas of harm and help they're familiar to us and they seem commonplace, but they actually have a strange aspect of scope that we ordinarily don't recognize, which is that we cannot see into the future. Right? If we cannot see into the future, we cannot really tell what is going on now. Or rather, the scope of harm and help is temporally close to now. So we cannot really tell if, for example, if I help my friend avert a car accident today, let's say I am a passenger in the car, and I say, whoa, stop, that person's running the light, and they stop. And so the car that might otherwise have hit us zooms past us. We both feel a great sense of relief. Maybe we laugh because we're, offloading some adrenaline or something. Life goes on, right? That all seems good. What about that would not be good? Right? Certainly we don't want to be hit by the car running the red light. But what we cannot know, or at least what we don't know how to sense yet, and different people in different circumstances have different sensing abilities, Some people might be able to sense deeply into time. There are stories of this kind of sensing. But what we don't know is what would have happened or not happened if we had been hit by the car running the red light. Surely we'd have both been injured. One or both of us may have died there, right? But because we were not injured, different futures arise. Yeah? And some of these could be far worse than us getting hit by the car, and we can't tell. So the appearance of something being good or helpful now, that appearance is temporally local, right? It's very local in time, and we cannot see the sequelae in the future. And this is one of the great difficulties of believing in the kind of thinking that we ordinarily do, which is different from sensing. It's a kind of accounting game, but it does not admit its own limitations. And we would be far more capable of intelligence if we learned to admit the limitations. We might still engage in such thinking, but we would realize that its scope is limited. It's not necessarily authoritative. So, this is what I mean when I speak about my own naivete in relation. I can't really tell what will be harmful or helpful. I have habits and histories of habit, ways of thinking that are familiar to me. And also I can tell what feels good in the moment, what feels right in the moment, if I'm willing to listen. But how deeply am I listening? And what am I listening to really? Am I really listening to this place right now, right here, these beings in this moment? Or am I listening to my ideas? Often I may make an offering to an animal or a living place, and the offering is made with a kind of innocence. It's made some from habit and some from heart. But that offering could be harmful, and it is dangerous. It's dangerous for the animals to relate with humans. Right at that moment, I don't know if you heard it, I was struck from above on my left shoulder by a piece of bark falling from a tree. Is that meaningful? Is there a message there? Unfortunately, because I'm busy talking, it's much more difficult for me to tell. And our pattern matching abilities, for all their incredible usefulness in our common human layer circumstance, can easily become misled. We can find ourselves in a state of apophenic confusion where correlations swarm in our minds, and we imagine situations, circumstances, messages, synchronicities, they're often called. And, this topic of synchronicity is deep. But it's also quite confusing because our pattern matching minds can easily find themselves in a situation where we can't tell the difference between a meaningful signal and a signal we are producing, our minds are producing as a result of their often overcharged capacity to see connections and to ascribe meaning to these connections. And this is the basis of various kinds of mental and emotional confusion or illness. See, a moment ago, I saw the shadow of a bird. I could not find the bird, but I sensed the bird was observing me. So even though I could not find it, I made a little offering, and the bird emerged to receive it. There was, a meaningful pattern matching there. I saw the shadow. I know this shadow. Even though I glimpsed it only briefly and only peripherally, I knew which kind of bird this is, and that it was observing me. And in a sense, it had communicated with me because it could easily have approached by stealth if it wished merely to observe me, and to be itself unobserved. Yeah? Observation is a big factor in all of these matters. Not one that I have the time to delve into deeply here. But one of the issues with what we understand as coincidence is that the coincidence, we tend to perceive it in the world, but we are the locus of the coincidence, and our imagination is the theater of coincidence. If we do not imagine connections, messages, and meanings, then we don't experience them, unless they're extremely overt, right? If the ground suddenly starts shaking severely, I don't have to have much imagining, right? The earth is shaking. This is significant. It's blatant, it's obvious. It's dangerous. But the bark falling on my shoulder is much more ambiguous, and in that ambiguity, our imagination can become tangled in the possibilities and in promoting certain possibilities to probabilities, and then perhaps very carelessly or recklessly promoting what seems to us to be probabilities into facts. And this is much like the mind of someone experiencing schizophrenia. There's a sort of hyperconnective overdrive in the pattern matching aspects of cognition. And I have some experience of this kind of thing, and there are different flavors of it. Paranoid schizophrenia is an aspect of what we might think of as mental disorganization that sees threats everywhere. And there's an opposite kind, which might be something like ecstatic schizophrenia, in which all of the signals and patterns point toward beauty or our own incredible importance, or that perhaps, for example, someone thinks themselves a messiah, or the most important person, or, they think they are a very important person. They become megalomaniacal. And all of these things are natural potentials of our way of being in the world. And they are fascinating to explore, but they can be catastrophic to experience. They can destroy our lives or our relationships or our minds in the sense of ruining their otherwise ordinary coherence. Sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. Our minds are delicate manifolds. They are vulnerable to various kinds of distortions, some of which is profoundly useful. Insight can be seen as a kind of distortion of consciousness, but so is paranoia. It can be profoundly exciting to experience mania, and for some people this experience is primarily creative in some circumstances, and for other people in other circumstances this experience is devastating, even though it can appear on the surface to be beautiful and profound. So I just like to call back to mind the importance of employing non-allness in our thinking. When we hear statements like, men are blah blah blah, women are blah blah blah, people are blah blah blah, we're seeing an experience of the opposite of non-allness. We collapse the entire category into a single point, which, by the way, is a status that is impossible. Not only is it not true, it's not possible for that to be true. And in fact, if we look very closely and we think carefully, we will find that most statements in language are not possible for them to be true. Right? Statements about truth in language are of an order that is different from truth in experience, and different from truth in being, different from truth in relation. And that status is vastly lesser, right? It's missing crucially important features of dimensionality, possibility, play. And by play I mean the way that in which we are in experience or in relation, the way in which that transforms experience and relation, and accounting and derivation and meanings that we draw. Right? In a state of ecstatic wonder, we will have an entirely different experience of identity, meaning, and relation than we will have if we're simply thinking in language. Oh, there's a tree. Oh, there's a bird. Oh, the flower is pretty. Right. This strange linguistic overlay largely evicts us from deep and meaningful relation and wonder, awe, participation in meaning, rather than acting as the deriving arbiter of meaning or identity or so on. If I see the bird as an instance of all of the peoples, and then secondarily as an instance of all of the bird peoples, and then all of the sparrow peoples, and then these lineages of sparrows. If I imagine the bird this way, my opportunities for relation with it are very different from if I just say, oh, it's a sparrow, take a picture, on to the next thing. Yeah. The living beings are doorways into awareness, not just of our own nature, but of nature and origin, relation, communion, all of these things. Unless We make the door so narrow that only theories and ideas can enter or emerge. And in this case, we've suffered a tragic circumcision, an amputation, a loss. So although the living beings are aware that humans are generally dangerous, they're also aware that they can be uniquely wondrous and friends, companions, co-beings. We can go in the world together, with and for each other. And often when this sense prevails, this is what is meant by magic, right? But it's not really magic in the metaphysical sense. It's magic in the sense of escaping the cognitive overlays that would otherwise inhibit it. It's like achieving a kind of escape velocity from the gravity of Earth's, surface. Yeah. So yes, I was thinking of these things last night when I thought of the living beings as peoples, and I also realized, well, they think of us as a people too, maybe, although I don't know how much representational thinking they do, but they're certainly capable of thinking in their own ways, in ways unique to each of them. And we can share in that thinking when we connect with them, or when we simply remove the divisions. We can do the opposite of connection, right? We can simply remove the barriers that might otherwise prevail. And then our senses, the myriads of potentials of our sensing and relational affinities, right? Then these naturally surface and become accessible to us. So let us learn together not to think of identities as points, right, and collapse them down into very simple. Here's part of the problem. I see. There's some territory issues today. And the territory issues become more concerning as we close in on nesting time. Yeah. This is very complex. I must pause to observe for a bit. I think I have some sense now of what's going on. But I won't place too much trust in my thinking. To keep watching, keep feeling. So to bring it back to the beginning, again, identities are shifting, more like shifting topologies, and our own relation with them transforms them. Our observation of them transforms them. Our participation in them transforms them. And the animals may be aware that the humans are dangerous, but they're also aware that it can be powerful and beneficial to have a friend in another universe, in the human universe. This can be very powerful. But also it's dangerous. And so too for us, it can be very powerful to have a friend in the world of the bees, or the trees, or the skunks, or the beavers. But it can also be dangerous. We can get hurt, they can get hurt. Loving is risky. And our intentions, however noble they may be, however heartful they may be, can get us into trouble when we're too used to thinking in a certain way and acting in a certain way, and so we stop paying attention to what's going on right here, right now. Today in the garden, there's something different. And it may well be that the girl bird has laid eggs. And so Ipharos is acting as a sentry. Has to pay really close attention and make sure that he is aware of local threats and can repulse those threats which he's capable of repulsing. And that includes other birds of his own kind. Though I suspect there's more to it than that. This is my sense of what's going on today. He's very busy managing the territory. So bear in mind that when we relate with other living things, our reputation is involved, and it transforms, and it spreads far and wide. It may even spread across the boundaries of a single lifetime. Most of what is true about being in relation is unknown to us, and vastly unlike what we think in language and models. And if we keep this in mind together, then we will escape some of the traps that would otherwise close their jaws on our our sensing, our capacity for deep relation, our creativity, the beauty, the resonant ancient beauty at the heart of our humanity. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.